This was a slide that we saw for the first time more or less exactly 2 years ago when the IPCC's number 6 report came out. The circles added are actually our own. This is basically where we grow all our food today. As our temperature rises and the soil where we grow our food loses its ability to retain water. This is a recipe for massive geopolitical conflict. It was a massive wake-up call for me and David. And it was really the start of how we thought about what could be done.
And of course, a lot of these regions are actually not growing crops for food. They're growing crops for sustainable plastic, for sustainable fuel. So it influences our economy in a very fundamental way. Coming from an investment background and having had 30 years making money for big money, we've come to realize that if you've got something which isn't working, you have to do something about it. And what isn't working at the moment is the reduction in the oil and the gas and the coal production that we have. And to the story of the fact that we can triple our renewable energy by 2030, even when we do that, we would still be increasing our oil and gas and coal production if our energy demand just continues on its path. Having come to that conclusion, we then started on thinking, how can we actually change this? And that's why It's For You came out. And the problem is an economic one. Are people going to pay in order to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground? And that's one of the challenges that we faced. And we spoke to many people. The problem, they say, is people don't care. So we then thought we'll find out with It's For You. And we went and we heard many of the stories in the past 6 days. And they have been emotional. They have been really moving. And we have had this aspect where the reflections have brought us to ask, what do we really want? Do we really want to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground? Do we really want to think that actually our projects to regenerate and to heal the planet and to bring about a better equality, a better dignity to every person there, do we really want that to be supported by oil, gas, and coal being kept in the ground? We came across a remarkable gentleman, Preston, who actually has a business that does that. And here he is talking a little bit about how he does it.
So I think there is a hesitancy to pay for what you and Richard and all of us are working on here, which is to really go after the ownership of the minerals.
Yeah.
Because I think unless you live here in the United States, it's really government-owned minerals. And it seems kind of like an audacious task to go after purchasing or getting some sort of an operating agreement with the government for control of those minerals.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S., obviously, roughly 66% of the minerals are owned by people other than the U.S. government. So it makes it a lot easier.
Yep.
But the next step is, okay, so we're going to buy these minerals, David and Richard. So how do we actually have a return on our investment? And so I think there's an unfamiliarity, or well, there's beginning to be a familiarity. Is that, wait, you can make carbon offsets out of these things? But then they immediately come back and say, well, you're going to have 100% leakage because you're going to take your coal out and then they're just going to mine it someplace else.
Yep.
And, that's an argument that everyone throws out because it's just I don't want to do it, so it's leakage.
And indeed, this leakage problem, right? And it becomes a rationalization in some ways. There are those that says it will just finish. There is only so much oil and gas and coal, and by the time we finish the transition, they'll just run out. And Preston again had this to say about that.
And then the other argument that I run into is, and that people don't understand, is I'm going to use fake numbers just for simple math for Richard and David and I. Let's just say we have in the United States 100 million tons of active mining projects at any given time today. Okay, so let's just say we're mining 20 million tons a year. So it'd be 100, 80, 60, 40, 20, 0.
Yep.
Okay, but the reality is, no, it's 100. Last year was 100, and next year is 100. Well, why is that? Because
Exactly.
we're adding reserves on a daily basis to make up for that we're removing.
And there you go. And Richard, maybe you can explain also why this aspect where the renewable energy becoming cheaper is also not going to make the change.
Well, this is a real area of controversy. And today, wind, solar, and hydro power is very, very competitive. Its marginal cost is below a lot of fossil fuel production. Certainly, the marginal oil field, which at the moment is basically fracking in the US, potential deep water drilling in various Atlantic shelves, or tar sands in Canada, are significantly more expensive than the marginal cost of renewable energy. But I remain somewhat skeptical for a simple fact. There is no stopping the production of these more expensive fields if there is still demand for that energy. So even if the renewable energy producer might be able to turn a profit of $10 per whatever unit they produce, we will still mine coal and we will still drill a hole in the ground or in the sea pumping oil, even if we can only make $1. Because as long as someone somewhere can turn even a minuscule profit, it will be produced. And if it is produced, it will be consumed. So I remain skeptical about the story that only the cost of renewables will manage to displace traditional oil, gas, and coal fields.
So that brings on this conundrum in some sense, is really down to the owners of these assets, of these minerals. And what would the owners want to do? And the owners can get compensated for owning them and not taking them out. So you can imagine someone starting with that. But the people to compensate them are the people who need the carbon offsets, if they're treated as carbon offsets. But that will only go at a certain pace. But I think we need to move much faster than that, which is what people are talking about. And of course, in many ways, our elections have to deal with each election cycle, whereas our climate devastations are really dealing with a time that is measured in a very different way. So where does that leave Richard and me? And where does that leave you? And this is being for you. It leaves us with this sense that we need to create a very different sort of a market. And here it is. And we need to be able to create a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. So imagine this. Imagine that you're about to go and propose and get married, and you're there going to looking for your wedding rings. And you're doing this because you have this wonderful vision of wanting to share a future, even if it is uncertain, that you want to have this journey together for that future. What better way than doing that than to know that somehow, in one form or another, a fraction of the money you pay for that special wedding ring goes to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And in doing that, in having something like this, it lets everybody see that this is the thing to do, simply that. And imagine if you're an employer and you want to motivate your employee and you want to give him a pay rise. What better way to really motivate him than to be able to say to him, look, I will match your pay rise to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And if you can do that, then your employee will feel, actually, you know what, I am working for, even in whatever work I'm doing, I'm looking after our common home. And I'm creating a better future for my children and for all the people around me. And that itself can be quite motivating. And Richard, what about you? What do you think about going to a Taylor Swift concert? How would you think of a fraction of that ticket? Because you go to music concerts all the time.
I think it fits very, very well into the overall picture of saying, when I spend my money, I'm going to spend it with those who I think make my life better. Now let's think about that for a second. I want to direct that spending towards those who make my life better. If I am worried about the future, and I certainly am, then I want the recipients of the money I spend on goods and services to actually be committed to taking oil, gas, and coal out of production and keeping it in the ground. So if I'm prepared to spend $100 on an artist I do want to go and see, it's reasonable that a couple of dollars on that ticket gets redirected towards keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground. And that applies to all goods and services I can think of. And the mathematics is actually very, very simple. Every business needs its clients and customers, because otherwise you won't remain in business. And all governments need businesses, because otherwise they will not be able to raise revenue and provide the services that the citizens demand from them. So when all that fits together, and given that our economic model is based on us continuing to consume and spend money on these goods and services, we actually have enormous power as consumers of the world to opt to spend our dollar in the pocket with those companies who are committed to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground.
And the essence is, by knowing, investors knowing that there is such a market, that there is such an interest to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground through our spending. And as far as government is concerned, what this does is it actually increases our spending, and that's a good thing for our overall economy. But in doing it in a way that actually helps all the regeneration and the healing we need for our planet, because it's spending that actually goes to keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, as opposed to extracting more of it out to harm and poison our planet and all on it in that form. So this becomes a turning over, a flipping of the table, and a new way of actually creating an economy, creating a market that actually moves everything forward, allowing people that choice for them to be able to say, you know what, the money I spend, I can choose who to direct it to. And if I see these people and they are part of the group who are redirecting it to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground, investors will be able to come in and will be able to say, you know what, these assets, they're worth buying to keep in the ground because I can be paid on one side in terms of carbon credits. And that generally is associated with the production that's ongoing. And that can come on through by saying, you know what, we'll match it to the renewable energy that's being produced, so that we can match and keep making sure that we have the energy we need. And then on the other side, you can keep those reserves down and start eating away on those reserves, so that out of the 100 million tons, and we take out 20, and then we take out another 20, we genuinely will see that there is only 60 left, and then only 40 left. And in that way, the whole change, the innovations and the creativity would come along and say, how can we move and actually help ourselves to go forward? And that's where technology gets the backing into moving everything together. And so it both liberates us and frees us from this tyranny of the climate. So that's our call, to create a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, to be able to express our wish that a fraction of the money we spend goes into keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground.
Indeed. It actually is that simple. We need to create this market for people to see the true cost of the use of oil, gas, and coal, and for us to actually find an economic way of leaving it in the ground. Make no mistake about it. It can be done. We have that power.
And to finish off with just one last thing. If all this seems impossible and all this seems like you can't do this, well, it's the same as what Preston talked about. You know, these are just rationalizations, because it's time that we put procrastination aside. It's time to believe in the impossible, because waiting is no longer an option. So very much hope that we'll get the support of all the people. We really want to raise this so that we can go along, and for everybody to talk about the possibility of creating a market for keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground, where you can have your spending, and your spending becomes a part of the money that will be able to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.